I encourage you to get that rest. But guys, as we keep just walking through every day, I just believe prayer is becoming more and more important. Prayer and remembering that there is a God that cares about us. It's saying, call on me first in everything. And it's a daily struggle, but it's there. And that's kind of what's led into what I want to share with you today and next week. Just to kind of to clarify with you, there's not been an official decision made, but I would plan on saying we'll probably be meeting out here again next week on Sunday morning. Honestly, we were talking about it, as much as I would prefer personally to be in a building. Man, we've had some beautiful Sunday mornings for gathering. I think we were saying our first one was the worst one, and it was just windy, and in Kansas, that's not a big deal. We're used to that. You just caught every other word instead of all of it because it kept blowing it away. But we've really had some really beautiful days, and last night I was actually at a point of going, uh-oh, what's it going to be like in the morning? So the dog and I took a walk by here this morning and thought, no problem. It's going to be great. So, so far, he's still taking care of us even in our gatherings. But the plan will be to be here next week. I would probably say to plan on being here through July. But then we'll see what happens in August. I do know that August 15th, we've already been asked to either move out or to join the Lutheran Church because they have their annual, whatever they do thing, concert, something going on that day. So we're going to have to make some decisions by that time. But I was asked by them, they've already contacted me working on that. But plan on this for next week. Hopefully, eventually, we'll get back in and we'll see what happens. The other thing I want to share before I go is I found out last week, sometimes Facebook is good because it reminds you of things that you forgot about. Kind of like I forgot that it was my brother and sister-in-law's anniversary the other day, but Facebook reminded me in time that by 11 o'clock at night I was able to at least tell them happy anniversary that day. Sometimes, though, it's the opposite because sometimes you don't see it till the next day when you feel bad and guilty that I missed like Cindy's birthday last Sunday here, and we could have sang happy birthday to her. And so just because we didn't, when we leave today, just say happy week late birthday to Cindy if you would, if you didn't know that, and didn't give her all the very personal Facebook happy birthdays that we do. The other one, I'm kind of disappointed, though, because I was going to make up for it and tell Bill, is today Bill's birthday? And he decided that he didn't want to be with you today for his birthday. Oh my, he's using the storm as an excuse because he got home at 5. So instead, let's drive by his house and everybody honk right after the service, okay? And tell him happy birthday. We're thankful he was up all night with the storm. Yesterday was Craig McGuire's birthday. I don't know what happened 9 months before this time of the year, way back when, but a lot of birthdays on this one same weekend. And I look forward to being able to get back in, do different things that are a little easier to keep track of and whatnot during that time. But for now, we're here. We're trying to make the most of it. And that's kind of how I've continued to just be looking at each day that we go through. I've shared this before a couple times, but, your birthday's coming up, like in the next 9 months? This week. What day? You think it's Thursday? Can I ask you which birthday this is, or is that a bad idea? One more than last year, and she thinks it's on Thursday, so that'll give you an idea which birthday this is. Well, happy birthday coming up. Is there anything you would like us to do for you special? We're going to honk at Bill. Everybody's going to say a week late to Cindy. Take up a collection. Hey, you know what? Thank you. Speaking of offering, we do have the box back here. I forgot all about that. Thank you for reminding us of that. I guess if you want to make a special offering to Barb for her birthday, or to Jim to take her out, you can just write a note on there and stick it in the same box. He made it anyway. I did forget, though, that we do have a giving box now. You can still send, those that have been through this whole thing sending to the church, you can do that. We can still give online. If you go to the website, you can still drop it by the church, but there is a box that's going to be there even when we get back. That box will kind of be the box to drop the offering in. So it is sitting on this bench back here just as a reminder on that. Anyway, as we continue to walk through just life, but I know this time adds to it, the question that has been going through my mind, and I shared this about a month ago, that I keep asking myself with everything that new thing that comes up or just regular life thing is, what is my purpose in this? Like, what am I supposed to do? What is the point of me even being around or in this? Even when it comes down to just even my job here. What is the point of my job? I mean, obviously the normal day-to-day activities have changed in different ways, from the beginning of just everything that's happened to now just taking on responsibilities, now giving them back to someone in the office. Things just continue to change. So often what's going in through my head and that's been on my mind is, what is my particular job? What's the point? What's the purpose? What do you want me to do in all of this? And I think I shared with you last week, probably about almost a month ago now, just one night laying in bed and was actually praying that before I went to sleep. And at that point it wasn't, most of the time when I ask that, it's not a poor me, what's my role? It's just a, what am I supposed to be doing right now? Like, just in anything. Like, if someone's struggling, how am I supposed to connect with them? What do you want me to do? Do you want me to get together? Do you not? Like, just literally every little thing that seems to be a question that goes through my mind more right now. And that night when I was laying in bed and just praying about it, the one thing that went through my head more than anything is when I got the whole, you know what, there's a lot of divisiveness. Your job is to try and continue to promote more love through the division. Like, to turn the divisiveness around to an opportunity to love more than anybody's ever loved. I do truly believe, and we may share more on a full deal, that no matter what anybody thinks about anything going on right now, at whatever level, whether it be political, social, just whatever level, those that have different feelings, those that feel like this might be taking place or this is what's happening, whatever anybody thinks, I do strongly feel at the deepest core of it all that there is an enemy that the Bible tells us about that says is roaring around like a lion, prowling around like a roaring lion, looking for someone to devour. I think he is taking advantage of this opportunity to create division and to create judgment and to create not just dislike, but hate and shame and suspicion and everything and anything. No matter what anybody thinks about it, when you really just pull back and look, there's so much more division taking place. And I thought, one of the things I felt that night was he said, your job, at least with the church, I can't do anything on a national level. I can't do anything beyond what we did earlier and pray. But your job with where you're at is to encourage these people to turn this goal of divisiveness into a greater opportunity to love. To look at that other person that does not agree with you, that has a whole different opinion than you, and go, you know what, I know we don't agree, so let's figure out how we can really love, because when does love actually happen anyway? If you look at the actual definition of love, if everybody just agrees with you through it all and you have all the same opinions, are you really loving each other, or are you just agreeing with each other? Love happens. The love is patient, love is kind, love is not self-seeking, love is not self-serving, all these kind of things. That happens when you're dealing with someone who feels different, where you need to implement that towards them. And because of the enemy's goal to create divisiveness, he's created a great opportunity for us to love beyond what we've ever loved before or in a long time. And so I strongly feel that that is one thing that night when I'm laying in bed that he shared. But the other thing was, it took me back to a book that I read a long time ago, really to me, one of the best books that I feel, for me personally, I've ever read, called Courageous Leadership. It's a little bit... if someone hears who wrote it now, his name's Bill Hybels. He's gone through a period, I don't honestly even know if it was legit or not, but he's no longer the pastor at Willow Creek because of some accusations that were made against him and stuff. But regardless, this book has stuff in it that has, at times I'll go back and refer to, but has as much, if not more, impact on me when it comes to leadership than any. And I started thinking for some reason about this book again. I don't even know why, but I remembered there was a statement in this book that for a while back I was really kind of hooked on, that I've kind of forgotten about in some way, that I've just through just apathy or just going through life and the routine, you know, sometimes there's things that get you, but as you go through, you just kind of go through motions and you forget of those things that really pulled you down, that are anchors, and kind of had brushed it aside. But he makes a statement in this book that has actually created controversy, where he says, the local church is the hope of the world. And I remember when this first came out, I believe it was probably early 2000s. I guess I could look at when this book came out. But it was probably early 2000s. When that first came out, there was discussion on that amongst ministerial groups. And for me, it was more with youth pastors at that time, where they said, come on now, that's kind of not true. The local church, he says local church, I've kind of turned it into just the church period, because I think we have a twisted view of what the church is, especially when we make it just local. You know, people sitting in a pew on Sunday morning does not make them the church. The church are those who are followers of Jesus, who say, that's my rabbi, I'm apprenticing under him, and I'm desiring to live my life around his values and his teaching and what he said, not the other way around. That's the actual church. And we all struggle in that. But that group of people who call themselves disciples of him, followers of him, believers, whatever you want to call it, that group of people is what I say when I say the church is the hope of the world. I was taken back to that, and it was like God was reminding me that your goal is to remind people and remind yourself that all the time you're hope. You are someone who presents hope to the world. Now he shares this really hit him, and I would take the time, but I don't want to, but where it hit him was, it was right after 9/11. And he got invited to go down to Ground Zero about 10 days after the event took place. And he said when he got there, it just blew him away. It was way more than what he was picturing in his head as to what had taken place and what had happened. He says when he got there, and they literally took him down to where I don't know how else to say, but the hole was, like to Ground Zero, to that. He says it was like a war zone there. He said it was just, it took his breath away. And 10 days afterwards, when he got there were still people. He says the pictures, the sights that caught his attention was the firefighters and the emergency workers and these guys that were still digging through debris, piece by piece, pulling debris out and pulling it back out silently, so that they could hear just in case there was somebody crying for help 10 days afterwards. He says, but seeing that and hearing the silence and seeing the work just took his breath away, being there. He said two things. He says, I wanted to reach out on one hand and grab him and say, stop, and go home and get some rest. But at the same time, he says, I was conflicted because I wanted to pat him on the back and say, good job, keep going. Because if I was at the bottom of that pile and there was a chance that somebody was there, I want someone like you looking for me. And he says, I was just twisted and I was torn as to how to feel. But he says, just the picture of it all just blew him away. And all these people that came together to try and help. And he said, but then he goes, it dawned on me that my view of this was so small, but I thought it was big. He goes, I had pictured that this destruction and all of this was within, he says, two slender buildings that had come down and created havoc about the size of a football field. He says, no. He goes, that was a big picture, but the real picture is 1 square mile of destruction, of buildings that had come down and windows that had been torn. He says when he walked around in this square mile, it was like people were like zombies. And he talked about one spot where I think it was the Red Cross had set up a station where they had pictures hanging up on the wall, all these pictures of people that were still missing, and family members and people that cared about him, where he said literally we're walking around like zombies 24 hours a day looking for some sort of something, some sort of hope, some sort of sign, some sort of what happened to the person on this picture. Are they here? Are they not here? And he says, I stood back and I was mesmerized by watching all of this that took place. He goes, in some wonderful organizations. The Red Cross was one of them that he talked about. I can't even remember all of them that he named off, but the ones you would probably normally hear were there, and they were handing out food. He said there were food trucks coming out giving free food to workers. There were bags being, just all this that was taking place. And he said he was amazed by it. But he went home and he said, God, it still feels like something is missing in this. Still feels like something I'm not seeing going on. And eventually, as he shares it, and one of them that I heard, he was kind of taken out the next day, and he's walking around, and he notices that there's people sitting around in coffee shops and in restaurants, and they're talking, and they're hugging, and they're praying, and they're sharing. And what he realized was that was the church, out with these folks that were hurting, also going another level further in dealing with their souls and their hearts and their hopes and their hurts. And he said it was at that moment where it dawned on me, there is something about the church that goes even a step further that makes them the true hope of the world. There's a calling, there's a mission, there's something put on those that say they're followers of Jesus, disciples of Him, to where they become hope. Before I go on, I want to ask, do you believe that? I mean, when I first heard it, I went, no, the church isn't the hope of the world. Jesus is the hope of the world. Are you in that boat? How do you feel when you hear the church is the hope of the world? Actually, I'm just going to ask that for a second. How do you feel? Do you agree with that? Is the church the hope of the world? Can someone say yes or no? The church is to be Jesus' hands. If someone were to walk up to you before you even heard any of this and says, you know what, are you part of the church? Yep. So you're the hope of the world. How would you respond? What would you say in response? I said you could sleep, and now we can wake up. And all of you that weren't wearing sunglasses, like I'm putting my sunglasses on now. Think about that for a moment, because I think a lot of us hear that and go, well, that sounds good and that sounds preachy, but I'm not so sure that that's true. And I've struggled with that, but I want to share with you this morning that it actually is. And I think sometimes we need to stop and be reminded of it. Let's look at where this comes from, and then I'll wrap this up, okay? But we're going to look at Scripture, because I don't want this just to be a Bill Hybels statement or a Jared Brown message. I want you to see where this comes from. This is where it is kind of nice that we're maybe having to use our phones a little more for Bibles, because we're going to flip to a few different places quick. So if you go to John chapter 1 first, I want you to see how this happens and where we come up with it's not just a 9/11 event or a Bill Hybels message that reminds us of this. It's actually the authors of Scripture itself. It's actually John, or Jesus, via John and via Matthew. And even Peter and Paul have something to say about it. But in John chapter 1, again, we're going to read stuff that this isn't going to be brand new to you. You're going to have read this before, but just read this and hear this with this in mind. John chapter 1, it says, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning, and through Him all things were made. Without Him, nothing was made that has been made." That's where we had our whole Jesus is the subject last year theme. We were reminded that nothing we experience was made without Him. "In Him was life, and that life was the light of all mankind. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it." Well, through this it says, there was a man sent from God whose name was John. And people thought that he was a light, but that's why they're clarifying he came as a witness to testify concerning that light, so that through him all might believe. He himself was not the light. He came only as a witness to the light, because the true light that gives light to everyone was coming into the world. Can anybody tell me who they're talking about right here? It's the Sunday school answer. Can we say it? Jesus is who they're referring to. Well, now look at Matthew chapter 4. Flip over real quick, Bible or phone, whichever one, Matthew chapter 4. starting in verse 12. So this just said that this light was coming into the world. They're letting him know. John wasn't it, but there was a light, the one creating, was coming. Matthew chapter 4, starting in verse 12. It says, when Jesus heard that John had been put in prison. So just imagine that moment. So the guy that had been testifying about the light that some people thought was the light, he was put in prison. And if you know the rest of the story, he was eventually beheaded per the request of a woman. That sounds kind of bad to say it that way, but per the request of a woman who was jealous of him, that had a wish, had an opportunity to make any request. She wanted his head. So he was eventually killed after he was put in prison. Once he was in there, he never came out. And when Jesus heard that John had been put in prison, says he withdrew to Galilee. Leaving Nazareth, he went and lived in Capernaum, which was by the lake in the area of Zebulun and Naphtali, to fulfill what was said through the prophet Isaiah. This is what was said. Land of Zebulun and the land of Naphtali, the way of the sea beyond the Jordan, Galilee of the Gentiles, says the people living in darkness have seen a great light. On those living in the land of the shadow of death, a light has dawned. And then from that time on, Jesus began to preach, repent, for the kingdom of heaven has come near. Now, if you remember, he also shares that, hey, this is what this light has come to do, to set a prisoners free, to captives free. He goes through this process and he says, I'm the one. So John tells us that there is a light coming to the world. There was a world of darkness, a world in need of hope. There was a light coming, and later on, after the one that was witnessing to it was put in prison, the one that was a light comes and speaks up and says, here I am. I'm here. Jesus is the light of the world. He is the hope. And I think we believe that. I think we get that. I think we understand that. That's why when someone says the church is the hope of the world, we go, no, Jesus is. Scripture says that Jesus is. Jesus himself says that he is the light. Well, here's where things start to change a little bit. Jesus then, in Matthew chapter 5, continues to teach those that are following him. And I want you to look at his words here, more of his hopeful words in what he does. This one who is claimed to be the light, that John said was the light, the hope of the world, says this to the people listening to him. He says, you, we could probably almost add that word now, because he's letting them know that here we go. You, if you're going to follow me, you are the salt of the earth. But if the salt loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled underfoot. And now here it is. Look at the next thing he says. You are the light of the world. If Jesus came to you and said, hey, the church is the hope of the world, and you went, no, Jesus, you're the hope of the world, do you know what he would say? No, you are the light of the world. Yes, I am the light. Yes, I came to be the light. Yes, I came to do all this, but as you follow me, guess what I'm transferring on to you now? Guess what responsibility I'm giving to you? He says, you are the light of the world. A town built on a hill cannot be hidden. Neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on its stand, and it gives light to everyone in the house. And then he finishes by saying, so in the same way, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven. Right here, Jesus takes away our ability to say, we're not the hope. He says, yes, actually you are. I did come to be that, but guess what? I'm transferring that on to you. Now, we know the story. That's because he's no longer in our presence. He's no longer here walking on this earth. He needs representation. He needs someone to carry that on. He needs hands and feet. And so he says, that's you. You notice who he said that to? What we call the church. The ones that were following him. He didn't say it to the president. He didn't say it to the governors. He didn't say it to Congress. He didn't say it to whoever you want to throw in there. He didn't say it to the Red Cross. He didn't say it to any other. He said it to the followers of him, the church. Now maybe they get involved in those things, but it's not those entities and those organizations and those whatever that he's expecting to be the hope of the world. It's the people that say they follow him that we call the church. Peter says it pretty specifically. You can write this down in 1 Peter 2. He says, "You are a chosen people. You are royal priests, a holy nation, God's very own possession. As a result, you can show others the goodness of God, for he called you out of darkness into his wonderful light." That's why we are the hope of the world. And Paul says, "We are therefore Christ's ambassadors, as though God were making his appeal through us." I know this uses the word light instead of hope. But what does light bring? Why do we turn on lights in a dark house? Why do we have light at all? Light is hope. Light gives guidance. I got to help with the softball team on Tuesday and was sitting in the dugout, and it was right after the storm that, I don't know if you were part of it, but our house got the power knocked out for a while. And we were talking about that in the dugout, and one girl said, "Yeah, it all went out," and I started walking around the house and went down to my sister's room to see if her lights worked, because I was a little scared upstairs. And it's pretty fun to have that conversation. I don't know how old those girls were, but they're young, to have them with them. She was looking for someone because she thought the light was just out in her room, not everybody's. But what was she looking for? Was light, for hope. We live in a world of darkness. It just said it. We know it. People are looking for light because it brings hope to their lives. And Jesus, via John and via Matthew and Peter and Paul, and then eventually Bill Hybels and others have said, remember, you are that light. You are called to be the hope of the world. So what I want to ask you today is, are we carrying that mantle? In our conversations, in our doings, in our beings, are we being hope to the world? I don't mean all the time, because I know I'm as guilty as anybody. We're weak. We have our bad moments. But is it at least our desire? Is it at least our goal each day to say, in the midst of whatever, I'm going to be in this situation someone that brings hope? Maybe you're at breakfast with a group of people and all the conversation is going on, and let's all be real, we know it often can turn quite negative quite fast. Are you the one that's going to say, you know what, there could be hope in this, for whatever it is? Or maybe even talk to Jesus, the one that actually brings hope. If we're part of the school system right now, which is, I feel so bad for them, how frustrated they got to be as they try and figure this out and the things that keep happening. It'd be really easy to get with colleagues and just start really going off. If we're a follower of Jesus and part of the church, are we one that's saying we can bring hope? If you're one of those college students or even one of the few high school students that want to go back to school, and you're sitting around with the buddies and they're all complaining about what's taking place and how things are getting set up, are we one that goes and brings a different perspective of hope and shines a light? Because that's what we're called to. That's who we are. But at an even deeper level, are we connected with someone that we know is really struggling deep within? Are we bringing them hope? Are we sharing with them? Whether you like it or not, you're a light, one way or the other. You're shining some kind of light. You might be a cop light, you might be a spotlight, you might be pointing out all the faults, you might be doing that. You're a light. But are we being the light of hope? One that guides someone to something where there's possibility, or eventually guides them to Jesus. I want to read to you, and this will be it, just these quotes here, and I want to read them to you, and you may not agree with them, and that's why I'm reading them to you. Because I want you to digest them. And over this next week, I just want you to process and think about this and maybe even talk about it. If you're here with your spouse, talk to them about it. If you're here with a friend, talk to them about it. But I want you to think about this, but in that book that I mentioned to you, Bo Hybels writes this. He says, the church, he would make the argument, is the only organization that can truly, genuinely bring life-changing hope. Or life change, period. And here's what he writes. He says, for 8 years during the decade of the 90s, said I went to Washington, D.C. every month to meet in the foremost centers of power with some of the highest elected officials in our country. Just in case you guys didn't realize it, he was at a bigger church with a more influential group of people. I have yet to go meet with these people in D.C. So that's why he's able to write books like this. But he says, what I discovered was not how powerful those people are, but how limited their power really is. All they can actually do is rearrange the yard markers on the playing field of life. They can't change a human heart. They can't heal a wounded soul. They can't turn hatred into love. They can't bring about repentance, forgiveness, reconciliation, or peace. He went on to say, businessmen can provide sorely needed jobs. Wise educators can teach useful knowledge of the world. Self-help programs can offer effective methods of behavior modification. Advanced psychological techniques can aid self-understanding. And all of this is good, he says. But can any of it truly transform the human heart? And then he finishes by saying this, I believe that the only one power that exists on this sorry planet that can do that. I read that wrong. I believe that only one power exists on this sorry planet that can do that. He said it's the power of the love of Jesus Christ, the love that conquers sin and wipes out shame and heals wounds and reconciles enemies and patches broken dreams and ultimately changes the world one life at a time. And what grips my heart every day is the knowledge that the radical message of that transforming love has been given to the church. And then we have been commissioned to go and to share that and to be the hope to the world. I don't know what each person sitting here can do with anything that's going on in their lives and what's going on around us. I still don't even always know what I can do. But one thing I know that I can do is somehow be hope. I can at least start with that.